Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm Justin, and tonight we are going to discuss 1987's Suspect. Directed by Peter Yates and starring Cher, Dennis Quaid, Liam Neeson, John Mahoney, and Joe Mantegna. Played by Cher, Kathleen Riley is an overworked public defender assigned to represent Carl Wayne Anderson, a deaf veteran accused of murder. Facing one obstacle after another, Kathleen struggles to communicate with her violent client, going up against an antagonistic judge and her conflicting sense of ethics with a charming juror. Suspect is a stylish neo-noir thriller loaded with suspenseful moments and a stellar cast, led by the ever-talented Cher. Suspect is for the horror fan that enjoys a mystery thriller amongst a courtroom setting. Also joining me tonight is my amazing co-host, Zena Dixon. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. Again, I'm Justin, and with me is my amazing, fabulous co-host, Zena Dixon. How you doing tonight, Zena?
Hello, Justin. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm also doing really well and really excited because this is a movie that I have been watching forever with my longtime best friend Danielle. 1987 Suspect, starring Cher, the one and only Cher. And this isn't a movie that we like quote a lot. We have a lot of even horror movies that we tend to make funny quotes out of, but just something about this movie we just have gravitated towards and we have enjoyed. And I've watched it so many times, but it's a late 80s neo-noir thriller. It has aspects of, film noir where you're sort of in a pessimistic environment in the city. You have a hero that is sort of on this quest to find some sort of truth within all this corruption. And I think that it is just a really fun, straightforward thriller ride. I really, performances, all solid cast. We have Cher, Liam Neeson, we have Dennis Quaid, all these, I think they all come together and they all do their parts perfectly. I mean, and not only do we have Cher, it's 1987 Cher. I mean, this was the year of her doing this, but also Witches of Eastwick, Moonstruck, winning the Oscar for Moonstruck. It's also when she did her 1987 comeback album, aptly titled Cher, with the hits I Finally Found Someone, We All Sleep Alone, Bang Bang. Now again, it's Cher, so 10 years later, she had another comeback album with Believe, but like it was just, I always am stunned with all that she did in this small amount of time, these great iconic movies, one winning her the Oscar. And I think that this role really shows the serious side of Cher. And I think that she just does a fantastic job in it. I think Liam Neeson is great in it. He is heartbreaking, but you believe that he could be sort of this violent person underneath. But again, like most neo-noir thrillers, you have these characters that like represent two sides, like crime and innocence, and he kind of has both. And then you have the incredibly likable, charming Dennis Quaid in this, who can be smug at times, but he's always endearing. And I think that it's all wrapped up in this sort of it's like courtroom drama, but with thriller mystery moments throughout. And as always, everybody, this is the non-spoilery part of our review. We will tell you when we're going to do spoilers, but I'll just say I think it's a fun ride. I think it gets, again, it's ABC. You go right along the ride. But also, I just always felt there was something a little special, more special about this than some of the other thrillers at the time. And I think a lot of it does have to do with this cast. And even though the mystery gets wrapped up, I almost find that secondary. It's just watching how everything unfolds and these characters that I find really enjoyable about it. There's a little bit of mystery, suspense, a little terror, but also just solid performances. But Zena, from my understanding, this was your first time watching it. What did you think of Suspect?
Oh my gosh, I loved it. I already watched it twice already. I feel like you know my heart, Justin. This movie, it is so enjoyable. I remember you telling me about it, and thank you so much again for the DVD. I'm going to keep it forever. So, I didn't read the back of it. I didn't watch the trailer or anything. I just went based on what you told me about it. So I'm like, okay, great. Because before this, I did see Cher in like The Witches of Eastwick and also Mermaid. I used to watch Mermaid a lot as a kid
Love
for some
Mermaid.
reason. Yeah, freaking amazing movie. And so I was excited to see this, but she is more serious in this role. And it's just like she plays this woman named Kathleen Riley. She's a public defender, and she kind of seems like she's a little bit burnt out, but it's one of those jobs that's like very, very demanding. So it's understandable. Right from the start, we see that her day's not starting off too great, and just before diving into that more, I really, really again enjoyed this. I feel like if you're someone who enjoys thrillers or someone who even enjoys courtroom thrillers, this is the one for you. um, I was a little bit worried that with it being like a courtroom thriller, like what if I get lost in the sauce? What if I'm not really into it? But no, it's like I don't want to say it's super easy to follow. It's the type of movie that I feel like you do have to obviously pay attention to because there's little things which we'll get into. There's little things that you can easily miss if you're looking down at your phone or whatever the case may be. So when I watched it the first time, I watched it with a group of people. So then I decided to rewatch it, and I saw so many things that I missed the first time around. And that's just from like saying, "Oh, hey," looking away, looking away from the screen. But yeah, it's just the acting is phenomenal. Like you said, there's Cher, Dennis Quaid, Liam Neeson, and it's just like I felt for Liam Neeson's character. Like he just seems scared, but then you can also, like you said already, he seems a little bit angry, which is understandable. And Cher is fantastic right away from the start. I won't spoil the opening scene, but right away from the start, because of what happens, I feel for her. I feel for her, and I couldn't imagine if that happened, to me. Just the way you're starting your day off and you have a packed day, and then it doesn't even stop there. And she still have to continue on. But yeah, it's just a really incredible movie, and it definitely did not go the direction that I thought in a good way.
For sure, agree completely. And I think we could both say, without spoiling anything, we both enjoyed the movie then. So I'm happy to dig in. So that means everybody, spoilers from here on out, spoilers, spoilers. But yes, I think that, yeah, very well said. It is sort of straightforward. You could sort of get lost in the sauce, but they somehow managed to make it, even the courtroom scenes, always interesting. There's
Yeah.
always these little moments, even with Carl, who is this deaf, homeless man. Because of that, the courtroom scenes, they feature this sort of computer device, so you're always getting a different angle or something different to look at even during the courtroom scenes. But yeah, this movie, what I think the first time I brought it up to you was when we did our Deceived episode.
Mhm.
I feel like it's also of that same ilk. They're neo noir thrillers that was popular at that time. They kind of came back. Film noir I think was from like the 1940s to 60s. Neo noir kind of came back in the 80s, 90s a little bit with thrillers and psychological thrillers, but not all of them would necessarily be neo noir. But Goldie Hawn's character in Deceived kind of goes through the same thing. She has this quest, and it's about duplicitous natures in people. And that's very much the same here with Carl Wayne Anderson. Yes, you can see the sort of violent side of him, but also your heart breaks for him throughout the movie, especially when everything goes the way it does. But I'll jump into a little bit of neo noir. But yeah, neo noir, film noir through the 1940s through 60s was a stylized use of shadows and lighting. And I feel like even in the openings, like the credits, you sort of get that feel of like a style that was used in 1940s film. I feel like even Cher's hair in this has like sort of a 1940s, late 40s look to it.
Mhm.
But the hero's on a quest alone and lost. They're desperate, believing they are the pursuer rather than the pursued. Cher thinks that she's going to solve this crime, but before long, she sort of becomes pursued, not only by the killer, but by Eddie, by these sort of men around her that want something out of her, whether it be Carl Wayne Anderson as she's his attorney, or Eddie, I think he's romantically involved, but also wants to justify something in his own life. And when they're most vulnerable, these characters are joined. Now, typically in the back in the day, film noir, it was a man, so they'd be joined by a woman. And this case, it's sort of inverted because it's Cher and she's joined by Eddie, which I love.
Mhm.
I love their dynamic in this film.
Yes.
It's so interesting. And ultimately, it's a generally pessimistic attitude, and it usually takes place in the city. And we have that. Yes, there's the courtroom scenes, but there are moments where, you're this takes place in Washington D.C. and you see the streets of Washington D.C. at in the day, and it's just as bleak as it is in the evening. But you have those scenes where like Eddie is in the city or Cher's being attacked in the city, but right away, like you said, right off the beginning, Cher, and this isn't a Christmas movie, but this did make me think of Christmas
Mhm.
because it is the holidays, it's winter at this point. She is right to the brink of having a nervous breakdown. She needs a break, basically, and she gets robbed right at the beginning. And it's where this comes in the neo noir is, I mean, the whole thing's neo noir, but like the fact that it happens in broad daylight and like nobody reacts to it, and they act like it's normal. Like
Mhm.
people are sort of like, "Hey, you're blocking the road." I mean, she's just had like this rock thrown in her car. Her mother's like necklace was stolen, her presents, and even Cher sort of accepts this. Her character Kathleen accepts this as the norm, and that's what I really find interesting about neo noir type films is this sort of idea that like corruption is just an acceptable part of life. Uh, Crime is just an acceptable part of life, and in some ways, I think that makes it scarier because people, when you start to become complacent with corruption, you tend to end up in situations, and I think that's what happens to the character of Eddie. Why he wants to redeem himself is because he's I think it's been the first time that he almost sold his soul for some votes. He ends up meeting this congresswoman and he really wants her vote, and he's willing
Mhm.
to do anything like sleep with her in order to get these votes. And you see this sort of change over him, and it's
Yeah.
sort of like he's reluctant because he's on jury duty and he really wants out of it, but once he's committed to it, he really commits to it. And I
Mhm.
just think that it's great to see in these types of film that have such a pessimistic tone, these characters that are trying to find a sense of righteousness, a sense of finding the truth. Cher is willing to believe, she could easily see that Liam Neeson's character did it. She's willing to believe he probably did do it, but she's still willing to find the truth.
I love that you mentioned that the streets of Washington, that it's filmed so bleak, no matter what time it is during the day and at night. And that's one of the things that I noticed. I love the opening scene because it just throws you right in, and that kind of shows the world. It also kind of showcases, at least for me, like the legal system. That said, the legal system, it isn't fair. And so it's just like looking at it from the outside, it's just kind of like you do have this man he's poor, he's deaf, he was there, he was hiding, he seems guilty. You know what I mean? And so it's just like everything was pointing to him, but I love the fact that Cher's character does decide to take it on and she gets deeper in it. And as she gets deeper in it, we do as well. And again, just taking a step back to the beginning, I again love the opening scene because right away, even when we saw her, we just saw that Cher was just driving to work. Someone throws a brick at her car, and like you said, people are just acting like it's normal and they're blowing their horns. No one stopped to help her, no one came out of their car, nothing. And these kids, they look like they were like teenagers probably. They stole her Christmas presents, her mother's necklace. There was even some when she stepped out of the car to go after the person, someone was on the other side still stealing more. So it's just like, okay, then when she gets to court, this is what she's assigned. She gets attacked by Liam Nielsen's character. And but again, it's just like she didn't really give up. And I feel like we all been there, where we feel burnt out, we feel tired, and it's just like, all right, this homeless man most likely did it because everything is pointing to it. But I love the fact that she did not give up on him. And then also going to Dennis Quaid's character, I love his character because he does seem like he is just sleazy. We saw what you were doing. You were willing to do anything, but then, like you said, he completely changed. He got more involved, and he was willing to take a stand because nobody else was. And we'll talk about it more, but it was just kind of like the tension that is in this film, like the buildup, especially like that library scene. I was like screaming at my screen saying, look up, look, don't talk to her, just hoping and just screaming with that. But yeah, it just felt like a very real movie. we've reviewed a lot of movies. We talked about a lot of movies, but I feel like this is probably one that felt extremely real, like very close to home with everything that goes on in the world. And not only that, with Kathleen, she is she's one of us. We've seen a Kathleen. Everyone has seen a Kathleen. If you haven't seen a Kathleen, you might be a Kathleen. But the fact that, again, I keep on talking about it because it's just like I feel like that really, I don't want to say it really touched me because that sounds corny, but it really did affect me because it was just like, okay, I know that feeling of when you feel burnt out and you have something that you're obligated to do. If it's your job, it's an obligation, you know? But then just the fact that where it's like she took a step back and she like completely saved Carl, Liam Neeson's character. Not only her, but you know, obviously Eddie helped her. And man, and then also too, let me just say that Judge Helms, okay, he just didn't like her from like the start, you know, and it was just like, what's your problem? Everything that she would ask, it's a problem, it's a no, it's this, it's that. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe he's just being a man, you know, towards a woman. And it was just kind of like, all right, maybe that's just what that is. But she just seemed like she was getting all these knocks, Kathleen, you know, towards her, but she just kept on pushing through. What's his problem? You know, what's you know, Elm's problem? Then when it's revealed. My thing is, while watching it, I didn't suspect that it was him. I really didn't. I just thought that he was, you know, he's a judge. So it's just like, technically, no. Kathleen and Eddie, they should not be talking. Why are they at the library together? So that makes a lot of sense, you know? It's all these things. So maybe he just wanted to make sure. And then when it's revealed, I was shocked. Okay. My mouth was open, Justin. When I was watching it, and I just love that because you know this is an older movie. It made in 1987, so you would think like, oh, I've seen it all. There's a familiar storyline, but I love how it kind of just twists it and turns it, and it was just like, what a reveal. Again, I keep on going back to just like the buildup of the film. They built it up by introducing us to Kathleen. We feel for her and everything. And even with Carl, his story is completely heartbreaking because, again, it does seem like it just may be him, but it's just like, what's the connection? Would he really kill a woman for $9? You know, it doesn't make any sense, you know? And so I didn't know who it was, you know? But yeah, that's just where I'm at right there. Again, I just keep on talking about like this, the tension of it all is what I really enjoy. And I realize how much, again, I do love like a murder mystery, you know, but especially if it's done right, like this one, the tension, the buildup, this will have you, at least for me, this is definitely going to be like a rewatch very often for me because it's just one of those movies. I feel like there'll be something new each time I rewatch it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, well, we'll give a little setup. So the movie itself, you know, we start off, the city's opening. We have this clerk, this woman clerk. Her name is Elizabeth Quinn. She's talking to this guy. We don't really know anything about him, but it, you know, it's the backdrop of Washington D.C., so we know politics are probably somehow involved. Well, and at the end of that opening scene, he ends up shooting himself. And then moments later, we find her dead in the river. So the setup is then, did Carl kill this woman? And it's up to Kathleen, Cher's character, to figure out the mystery. And I'd love to get into the performances. And you've mentioned the suspension, the suspense and the tension, which I think that, you know, they go hand in hand. And but as far as the performances, I think that it works because, again, you know, would Carl, the movie does set it up though that he might have done it out of desperation, and we see him being violent. But what's great about the movie, in conjunction with the tension and through Liam Neeson's performance, Liam Neeson does have this violence you see right away, but then as you peel away the layer, you're like, but it's maybe because he is deaf and he's acting out of anger. He doesn't know what's happening. And then a little bit of extra layer, you find out he's this army vet. And it, you know, and that what he wanted, the reason why he's succumbed to depression is because of what happened to him physically with his deafness, but also because he wanted a reason to fight in the war in Vietnam. And he felt he should have gotten one. And he lost everything because of it. And that's coupled with Cher. Everybody else has sort of overlooked him throughout this, but then you have Cher's performance as the very strong-willed but at times vulnerable Kathleen. She is sort of, like you said, at the mercy of sort of Judge Helms, and it is sort of like, why is he treating her like this? Why is he doing this? And the actor did a great job, but she's also up against Joe Mantegna, I think his name is, who's the other attorney,
Mhm.
and he also does. You've seen him in a million things. He does
Yeah.
a great job too, but you're sort of like you don't really know exactly what happened, and you want to believe that Carl did this, but because of how great Liam Neeson is, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. And ultimately, you have then the joining, and I think the chemistry between Cher and Dennis Quaid, who I'm not mistaken, I think they were dating at the time or
Mhm.
soon after. But they have a great chemistry. And it
Yeah.
is sort of, she's talking about how one of Cher's best scenes is, in my opinion, is when she's talking to her sort of colleague about she hasn't had a vacation. She'd like to have a child, but when could she have a child? Because she doesn't even have to date. She can't meet anybody. She's so overworked and busy. And they sort of question why they stay. And it's for the one guy that didn't do it. And this is Cher's thing. And it's sort of like in life, it never happens. The things you have to do in life rarely happen when you're feeling good and things are easy. It's usually when you're at your breaking point, it's the most important point. And that's what Cher's character is about. It's she's at her breaking point, but this is the time to really stand up because this is the one innocent guy.
Mhm.
And, I think that her performance with Dennis Quaid as Eddie, he starts off very smarmy, very, you know this guy, but you also know why he gets away with things. He's handsome, he's charming, he's got that charisma. And Cher also has that charisma naturally, but in this movie, it's not really, she doesn't use that charisma. It's very straight to the point. And I think that when the two join together, there's a spark that happens throughout the movie. And I think that's why my bestie and I we watch this so much is for
Oh.
that sort of relationship because it's not like a romantic comedy, but you love the dynamic of those two. And like you said, speaking of some of the suspense, one of my favorite tense moments is the library sequence. And it works perfectly because at this point, Cher had been attacked by that one guy, by the mystery man who's the other possible red herring suspect, Michael. You know, they had that sort of moment where Dennis Quaid's shirtless, she's tending to his wounds, but clearly there's an attraction. But the library scene, throughout all this, you have Judge Helms who's keeping an eye on her, and we now know why because he's ultimately the killer. And we know that he's keeping an eye because he keeps seeing them together.
Mhm.
And the lawyers cannot talk to the juries, collusion, all that. So it's happened once where it's close call, but it's even a bigger close call in this library sequence where they're both at the library because they've realized there are these cases. Somewhere along the way, there was a fixed case, and that's
Mhm.
really what led to everything to the beginning. Why the one guy killed himself? Why the secretary was murdered? Because the Elizabeth Quinn uncovered that there was a fixed case, and she was approaching people that were a part of that. Well, they're in the library searching these cases, and you had this moment where the judge comes in, he sits down, sees Cher, and you see her. We've all been in that moment where we're like frozen in fear, like we're doing something we shouldn't do. But if we
Mhm.
just act calm, everything will be okay. And they pull it off brilliantly. He gets closer and closer. Dennis Quaid, and she happens to pull out a stunt about diverting his attention so that he
Yes.
sees the judge. But I think that's one of the best scenes, and it's such a quiet scene, it's such a effortless scene, but like the choreography of it works so well. And that's what's great, I think, about this movie is how it's not flashy, it's
Mhm.
not trying to like jump scare out of the blue. It's these little moments that the actors involved really do well. And I think that I really enjoyed the side characters too, the little characters throughout, like when Dennis Quaid first arrives to jury duty to try and get out of it. He's talking to this like security guard officer woman, and she's sort of joking with him, like, you're gonna serve, there's nothing you can do about it. Or the parking attendant guy. I think he really, he's in one scene, but I think he really stands out as this like authentic quality of you believe that this kid could be working in this parking lot and he would respond to somebody like Dennis
Mhm.
Quaid who does have that sort of charm.
Just to piggyback off of you, first with Cher, this was my first time seeing her more in a serious kind of tone, you know? Again, where she just looks like she's tired, you know, but she wants to go on vacation and she's just so hot. She's a hot lady. We all know this. So I absolutely love her performance. I love seeing like a stern Cher. Then again, going with Dennis Quaid, I'm so used to, like, I know he's been acting for a long time, but I think when I started to really take a notice to him, it was more of like the 2000s, maybe the late 90s, 2000s, and I forgot, was it Cold? I think it's called Cold Creek Manor he's in. Um, Stephen Dorff is in it, that his family, Kristen Stewart's in it when she's like a kid, and they rent this house, and Stephen Dorff is kind of crazy. But then years later, Dennis Quaid, he plays a crazy man, and Intruder from 2018-19. Point is, I'm used to seeing him act as an unhinged man. So it's kind of cool just to go back, you know, and see him where it is like, oh, look at this hot man, you know, where it's like he's charming, he's all these things like you said, but his performance is great. And again, Cher and Dennis, kind of like you said already, they do have a chemistry. They make a great team. I love seeing them together. I was actually going to ask you that, like, did they date or were they about to or something, you know, because you could definitely feel it. You know, there's like a respect, you know, between them and stuff like that. And they just make like a great team. Liam Neeson, at first I didn't know it was Liam Neeson. I just saw this hairy man, this hairy, dirty man. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. But then each time we saw him, he gets a little bit more cleaned up and more
Right.
cleaned up. It's like, oh, is that you, Liam? And it is, you know, so that's cool. And then the character who played Charlie Stella, um, is it Joe?
Joe Mantegna or something like that.
Yes. Yes, I absolutely love him. He's been in a lot of things. I remember even watching him in Thinner, from the 90s, you know, Thinner, and a whole bunch of other things. There's some other stuff. Anyway, I love him. So it was great seeing him, even though we didn't really see like too much of him, but he always just has like such a presence. And I agree with you with the parking lot attendant. He was just interesting. You know, that town is full of interesting people, and I feel like he fits the town where it's just like, hey, this is what happens, this is just how it is, you know, type of situation. He's still working there regardless of what happened, you know, whereas probably there'll be other people it's like, no, but you know, it just seemed like it's that type of like city that they live in. So overall, like, I agree with you. I love the performances, and also with Judge Elms, man, like he really did a great job with his role as well. Because again, I just thought that he was just a man about doing his job. Okay, I didn't know that it was him. You know, I keep on saying that, but it's shocking in a good way.
Well, as we lead into that, because I think that takes us towards the ending then and discussing the reveal, I think it is interesting. Like you said, the first time through, you miss some stuff. So when you watch the
Mhm.
second time, you get it. Like everything that he does, Judge Helms, throughout the movie is so frustrating, but you believe it. You see, you're like, hey, I mean, at least me, I'm like, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge. Like, it makes sense to me why he might be like everything lines up. But then I think it's a really cool layer if you go back to watch it again, where you're like, this is why he did that, and this is why he did
Mhm.
that. Everything is crafted in this movie, directed by Peter Yates, who I think did a great job in creating the tension, creating the moments, and crafting the film so that there
Mhm.
are nothing's left to chance. Like everything
Yeah.
makes sense in the end.
So even though this movie, it was made in the 80s, like the late 80s, I feel like it kind of has that 90s feel to it. You know what I mean? Like it's compelling. There's a little sexiness to it, you know, a little darkness. And I really love it. I feel like it's still very much relevant to everything that's going on nowadays. There's like something really good about this. It has like a good backbone. It has like a good message, like the whole never judge a book by its cover. And then again, it's like just the performances, which I didn't say, everyone did like a great job, obviously, but it's also very convincing. And I know we talk about performances often, but you know, when I think about the judge as an example, I was convinced he was just doing his job, you know? So I feel like that says a lot. And then even with Liam Neeson, he was still powerful, but he's quiet the whole time. Like I just feel like it's just again, it's one of those movies that I feel like I don't want to say just watch it, but just watch it because I feel like I say that with everything. Um, because it just has that feel to it where it is one of those movies that is very much like an underrated gem that must be watched if you haven't seen it. And the crazy thing is, like I told you this previously, I never heard of it.
Two things. One, I think that it does have a great backbone to it. But I also, it's so, it doesn't really matter, I guess. But it's interesting that you say this because I always thought for the first couple times I watched it, I thought it was a 90s movie. I didn't
Mhm.
realize it was a late 80s movie. And not that this matters or anything, but I just think it's really cool that you said that because I'm like I said, I always watched it with Deceived or around the same, and I always thought they were kind of made at the same time. Now, Deceived, I think, is 91 or 92.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because courtroom type movies and stuff became a huge thing in the 90s, especially once like shows like Law and Order came out. The OJ Simpson trial became,
Yeah.
people could actually watch them. So this is a little ahead of its time in that respect. And I just think it's a really interesting point that you made. I don't know if it's a subconscious thing or what, because I always thought that too, that it was a 90s movie. And then,
Mhm.
then to find out, oh, it's a late 80s movie. Then to find out, oh, it's a 1987 movie where it's just when Cher made everything and did everything she did. And it was just so good. But as we get towards the ending, we ultimately find out, true to neo noir style, this mystery thriller is going to be resolved, and it's resolved because the killer, the ultimate bad guy, has to be within the system.
Mhm.
It's the movie's about corruption in society and those that are supposed to be our lawmakers and the upholders of the law. It ends up being the judge, but the whole mystery is unraveled through, we started with this law clerk, but then that story, her Elizabeth Quinn story, got kind of pushed to the side as we got to know Carl Wayne Anderson through Kathleen. She has this partnership with Eddie that we've discussed at length, great chemistry, fun, but there are these suspenseful moments throughout the mysteries. It's the library sequence or the scene where she goes to meet Michael. It's the red herring where she's attacked and he's clearly, has some mental issues. And ultimately, then he's disposed of. And I think that for me, it's almost incidental. The killer is because for me, it's just an enjoyable movie with some thrills and fun. But you know me, we've discussed this on several episodes. I love a good chase sequence, and it's not an elaborate chase sequence, it's not overdone, but it's there. And like you had said earlier, Cher goes to this party. She sees there's this guy that's been sort of who we've been directed to. It's somebody that Eddie knows because Eddie's a lobbyist. He works in Washington D.C. He knows a lot of people. Well, he's sort of steering Cher to this direction, to this guy Paul Gray, and it seems like it's going to be him. Well, Cher, she goes to the party, senses something's wrong, still thinking
Mhm.
him, goes back to the courtroom and the courthouse, and there's this sort of chase sequence that goes through. She runs down the stairs, through the elevator. Earlier in the movie, we see that there had been these painters. So she grabs one of their tools, and ultimately, this is going to be used to mark the bad guy. But they have their holding cells down in courtrooms, so it's sort of a sequence through there, and it becomes a sort of labyrinth, which makes sense for the rest of the film. Cher's character has been living in this labyrinth, not just in this case, but in her life. She's been trying to
Mhm.
find solutions to her life, figuring out this city. The city itself is a huge labyrinth, and ultimately she marks him, and it leads to then this big reveal that yes, we find the judge is the killer after all. And it makes sense because this has been ingrained in the movie where you have this law clerk who would naturally stumble upon a case where she would find it was fixed, and the one guy she reached out to, he decided to, his guilt took his own, made him take his own life. But the
Mhm.
next guy she reached out to, unfortunately, decided to get rid of her because we find the judge is right on, he's about to get another promotion. He's about
Mhm.
to get even higher up in the world, in the law, in government. And
Mhm.
luckily Cher caught him because it just would have led to more corruption. But I think it's a really satisfying ending, which ultimately ends with a trademark Cher laugh when Eddie and her finally can get together. She has a great little tender moment with Liam Neeson's character, and I think it's all wrapped up in a very satisfying way.
So, like you, I love chase scenes. And I feel like this one, it did feel like a labyrinth. It felt like a maze. It felt like it was like, how does she know where to go? But like you said, she's been there before. You know what I mean? She's been living pretty much there. It's her life, so it's understandable. Again, I touched on it earlier. I love that hallway scene where there's really nothing but shadows. We see her running down the hallway. We see someone coming behind her. I thought it was great. Like I really did. So it's just like, oh man. But then to my surprise, that meme, surprise, surprise. But yeah, that's pretty much what happened, where it's just like once it was revealed, like after this chase, well, I'm jumping ahead. After that chase scene, I love the fact that, well, let me take a step back. I love the fact that when she does grab a tool to defend herself and she knows exactly where to go. And this person who's chasing her knows exactly where to go. They're on her. They know where she's going. So then finally, she's up against this, like one of the holding cells, and the person grabs her. And we see it on the camera. I love this shot because we don't see the person. So pretty much Helms could have got away with it. Who would have really seen him? And plus, even if they did, he could just get rid of like that camera, like, like the security cameras and stuff like that. And plus he's a powerful man, clearly. So there's that. I love though the next day where it's just kind of like she pretty much announces that she wants Judge Elms to take the stand. And the gasp that I let out, because this was even after Gray, he showed up. So I thought that it was like, oh, okay, she's going to expose him. And, to the viewer's surprise, that's not how it went. So again, it was just pretty much revealed. That's a great reveal. I feel like it's a very, very satisfying ending. It's like a happy ending, even though it's, a woman lost her life and Cher almost lost her life. I mean, it's kind of traumatizing, all the things that happened to her, Cher's character alone. And then I love the fact that at the end, finally, Eddie and Catherine, they can be together. It's just like, that saying, this is what it was all for type of thing. And it just feel like, obviously, if she went on vacation, she would have never met Eddie and she would have never saved like an innocent man. So it was a happy ending and it felt real. Just watch this movie. I feel like it's one of those movies, again, like we always talk about loving thriller movies, and it has like that 90s feel, and it's like a murder mystery, and there's Cher. So watch it.
It's Cher. Yeah, I think that this is for the horror fan that enjoys the more thriller aspect. It has a murder mystery plot. It's got courtroom drama. It's got excellent performances. It is all nicely wrapped up with a really pretty bow at the end. But the rest of the movie does ask some great questions. It also gives you some powerhouse moments, and it gives you a little bit of everything that I think horror fans want, but also in a more traditional thriller setting. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House. Are you a fan of Suspect? What are some of your favorite neo-noir thrillers or Cher performances? As always, thank you, Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror, for joining us tonight. You can find Zena over at realqueenofhorror.com, on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at Wicked Horror. And I'm Justin. You can also find me at Wicked Horror, Overwhelmed Pop Culture, or on Twitter. Zena, thanks for giving Suspect a chance. I had a feeling you would like it, and I'm glad you did.
Thank you. You know my heart.
I do, because you know my heart. And we love you all, and we will talk to you next time.